Welcome to the Forge Truth Podcast, where we are building great men as God defines greatness. Forge is a movement of men with a mission to help all men realize they're the deeply beloved, redeemed sons of the Most High God. I'm your producer, Zach, and I'm here to discuss the issues that affect men the most with our two hosts, Dr. Pete Allenson, lifelong pastor and leader of Forge, and Jason Quinones, bishop of Core Faith Church in Oviedo, Florida. Men, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here, and Happy New Year, huh?
Happy New Year. It is good to be back. Haven't been with you guys since last year.
I know, man. It's been a long time.
Yeah,
it really has been a long time.
Yeah.
You still benching 5,000 pounds?
Close.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm working on building that up a little bit
I
more.
hope so. 2024, don't stay where you were last year.
No,
Is that your New Year's resolution?
Yeah.
Notch it up.
Well, we're going to be able to track this because assuming everything works out, this is going to be our first video version of the podcast.
Yeah.
So if you're not seeing this, then that means something didn't work. But otherwise, whether you're listening or watching it, welcome to the Forge Truth Podcast.
Yeah.
We have a guest today. Pete, why don't you introduce our guest for us?
Yeah, it's great to have Jim Cunningham with us today. James O. Cunningham, Esquire. Is that what they call lawyers? Or
I've been called worse.
You've been called, yeah. It's great. It's good to have you, Jim. I've known Jim for a long time, known his sister and brother-in-law and a lot of your family in town here in Orlando. And you are an interesting guy. And we're gonna talk about law. But let me just tell you guys a little bit about Jim. He is a graduate of FSU. And a master's. What was your undergraduate at FSU?
Marketing.
And then you went to Rollins and got a master's degree and in business. And then you went back to FSU and got your Juris Doctor in law and have been a personal injury attorney for how many years now?
45 years.
Good night. Isn't that something? And as when Zach first came into the room, he said, "You look like an actor." Yeah, I'm not sure which one, but he does.
I couldn't place it.
Yeah, I know. And then in 2003, you earned your Master's of Divinity degree at Reformed Theological Seminary here in Orlando. That is no small challenge.
Well, let me just correct you a little bit.
Okay.
Because the word divinity and the word attorney do not belong in the same sentence. So I received a Master's of Arts in Biblical Studies.
Okay, good. That's a smarter degree to go for, given that you were in full-time work as well. That's great. Well, Jim, it is good to have. Tell us a little bit about your family first, and then tell us about what you've focused on in law these past years.
Well, thanks for having me first, Pete and Bishop.
Yeah.
And I've been married for 45 years to my college sweetheart. We both ran track at Florida State, and I met her on the track at Florida State. And 45 years we celebrated in December, and she's fond of telling people it's been 10 of the happiest years of her life. We have 3 adult children. They're all married, and 10 grandkids, and what a blessing they are.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot. And we had them all for Thanksgiving. And it's a marvelous chaos is when they're all at the same house at the same time.
And exhausting.
Oh, my
and
gosh.
you get to impact the next generation.
Yes.
That's great. We had a guy this morning who is going to turn 90 like in January, and he's got 10 grandkids and 11 great grandkids. So he's really exhausted.
Yeah.
But you're recovered now since it's January.
Yes.
And that's great. Fantastic. Well, you have been recognized as one of the top lawyers in Florida for a long time. Personal injury is a tough area. How do you put Christian and personal injury attorney in the same category? How does that work?
Well, I think a lot of lawyers just sort of fall into a particular specialty. And it's not necessarily that they graduated from law school thinking, well, I definitely want to be a personal injury lawyer. But I actually worked for a personal injury law firm while I was in law school, and I enjoyed helping people. I enjoyed the joy of having someone get a financial recovery that really was meaningful and maybe change their life in a positive way. And a personal injury practice is different than any other type of practice because you don't get paid unless you win. And so it's the poor man's key to the courthouse. And you can retain the best personal injury lawyer you can find, and it's not going to cost you anything unless he wins. And so it's been a blessing for me over these last 46 years in law practice now, to help people who really need help and who are at a point where their lives have been turned upside down through no fault of their own, whether that be in a car accident or I used to do medical malpractice, don't do that anymore. But so it's been a blessing, and I hope I've been a blessing to other people along the way.
Yeah. So there are a lot of bad personal injury attorneys. There's a lot of bad pastors too out there.
There's a lot of bad people out there.
There's a lot of bad people out there, and you have redeemed, in a sense, that whole area.
Well, I don't know that I would go quite that far, but
In your practice, though.
yeah, I'd like to think that I've made a contribution, and like I said, I'm grateful that I had an opportunity to practice in this area because it suits who I am. Some people are inclined to pore over documents, and they love to look at the details of documents, and that's not me. I'm an advocate for a cause, and my clients all have a cause. And so it fit with the way that God has wired me to be in a position where I could advocate for somebody else, because I have an advocate, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
he's never lost a case.
That's right. I love that. That's so good to be able to advocate for others, and really ultimately serving the one that advocated for you.
Amen.
Oh, that is. Have you guys ever been in court? Had to go to court?
Just as a jury member.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It was a pretty rough 3-day trial,
Yeah.
and then he got convicted in a life sentence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Super interesting process, though.
Yeah.
I'm sure criminal law is very different than.
Well, yeah, civil law is nobody goes to jail, so that's a big difference. But the process in terms of picking a jury, making your opening statement, calling witnesses, making a closing argument, all of those things are exactly the same.
Huh.
And I've been a board-certified civil trial lawyer by the Florida Bar since 1984.
Wow.
So I've done some time in the courtroom. It's been a while, but I have done. It was in my earlier years a significant part of my everyday, day-to-day practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a very important question?
Sure.
What's your favorite courtroom movie?
Golly.
I
Well,
love
My
it.
Cousin Vinny's not bad.
Oh, that's great.
That's good. Do you cringe when you watch TV or movies and they just completely misrepresent how trials go? And
Well, there's not that many really good courtroom movies. There was one by Paul Newman, and it was called, I think, The Verdict. And he was just sort of a washed-up attorney, and he was against all these powerful forces. And I want to say it may have been a medical malpractice case. And he ended up winning. And he was sort of a drunk, and no one ever thought he would win. And the jury had a question, and the question was, can we give more than the plaintiff's attorney asked for? And that's the question that every plaintiff's attorney wants to hear. So that was a good one too.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah. I grew up watching Perry Mason.
Oh, wow.
Perry Mason.
That's very unrealistic.
Was it? Yeah,
Yes.
it had to have been.
Yeah, you never lose a case.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
And also, how many times did you ever see him pick a jury? How many times did the jury ever come back? It was all pre-trial. There was no jury involved. It changes everything when there's a jury involved. It changes everything.
No, I'm sure of that. I've been before a judge right after I got my first ticket, right after I got my license. Boom. And that was in Long Beach, California. I had to go before the judge, and he suspended my license for 10 days. Boom, right away.
What'd you do?
Speeding. And that was the first of like many tickets. But that was the only time I was in front of a judge. Right away. I don't think they do that anymore.
Well, we'll all be in front of a judge sooner or later.
Amen. That's right. That's true. Yeah. Bishop, how about you? Did you ever have to go?
I'm just going to plead the fifth right now.
Oh.
Yeah.
I like the way you're thinking.
Yeah, because I'm not. I have a pretty bad history, so I have been in the courtroom for many more reasons than that. But anyway, that was before Jesus, so I'm good now.
Oh, we need to do a podcast where we just talk about your criminal past. I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it was all when I was a minor anyway. So
yeah.
Can we make an adverse inference because he pleaded the fifth?
Well, we're not supposed to.
Oh, even in civil?
Well, there's no pleading the fifth in civil.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Is that right?
No, that's only criminal. The privilege against self-incrimination. You can't be forced to testify against yourself to incriminate yourself.
Okay.
If you could, there'd be a lot more people guilty, probably. But you cannot be forced to testify. And there's an inference, there's a presumption of innocence, obviously, in the criminal court, and there's none of those things in a civil court. The civil court is different in that the person bringing the case, which would be the plaintiff's attorney, has the burden of proof. And the difference between the criminal system and the civil system is that the burden of proof in the criminal case is beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, whereas in the civil case, it's what's called by the preponderance of the evidence, the greater weight of the evidence, more than 50%. So when you're picking a jury, you have to make sure that they understand the difference between the criminal system and the civil system, because you do not want them thinking that you have to prove your case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, because if you have to do that, you'll never win a case, almost never. You have to make sure that they understand that. And that's in every civil case, every plaintiff's attorney spends lots of time making sure that the jury understands that.
Wow. That's fascinating. There's so much to the legal process that, this is a macro question. Okay. How is our jurisprudence? I'm not sure the proper terminology. How are we doing in America in terms of producing justice for the average American?
Yeah. Well, remember now that we've got two systems in some ways. We have a federal system. We have the federal courts. And I have some experience practicing in federal court, but most of my experience is in state court. So you have a state court and a federal court system. And you also have a local and a federal levels. And I think at the local level, justice is probably being dispensed, as it always has been, pretty fairly. And remember now that I want to say it's the 7th Amendment to the Constitution. It's part of the Bill of Rights that guarantees everyone a right to trial by jury. So you know that if you're being judged by a jury of your peers, there's at least a decent chance you're going to be given a fair shot. Although as Forrest Gump once said, juries are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So you never know for sure what a jury's going to do, but on balance, you'd like to think that they're going to follow the law, they're going to base their decision on the law and the evidence, and they're going to reach a thoughtful decision. We're embroiled right now, obviously, in a high-profile series of litigation brought against a former president, and that, I think, has many people either cheering or, weeping. And it's, depending on which side of the political aisle you're on, you're either cheering for someone to be arrested and convicted and bounced off the ballot, or you're hoping that, quote-unquote, justice prevails. So I think law at the federal level in some of these high-profile cases is I think if you were to ask the average person, they would probably say the court system is not necessarily fair, and there's a two-tiered system of justice, and there's a problem. But I think at the local level, most lawyers would say it's fine. It's working as it's supposed to work. The one thing that really hurt us is COVID. You cannot impanel a jury when everybody might infect everybody else. And so the system really changed during COVID. First of all, the jury trials were basically backed up for years. And then when it was safe enough to go back into the courtroom and not feel like you're going to get sick, by that time everything had changed to video. And so now a lot of the hearings are video, not a lot of the mediations are video, Zoom, something like that. And I can tell you, I don't like a Zoom mediation. I like to be there in person. I like to be able to try to persuade someone personally, eyeball to eyeball, rather than in a camera where you don't really know if your point is being made or getting across or not. So the system is still recovering from COVID, and it will probably be still recovering for a while. And then there was a recent tort reform that passed last year in Florida, and it was sweeping. And it set a date beyond which or after which there was going to be a big change in the law. And as a consequence of that, and it's fine to have new laws, but as a consequence of the fact that if you have a filed lawsuit after a particular day, the rules that pertain to your case radically change. There was a flood of lawsuits filed to avoid the application of the new law, and the courts are still dealing with that, and they will be dealing with it for a while.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess that helped me to understand that sort of what the feeling is that on the federal level, it seems like it's so political and untrustworthy, but helpful to know that at the local level, it's probably well done.
I think so. And remember, you never read about the jury verdict that came back giving the person 0. And there's a lot of those. The only time a verdict makes the news is if there's a multi-million-dollar verdict. And so people can get a distorted view of what it looks like to go to court. It's like jackpot justice. You go in and you're shooting for, something that you don't deserve. That's the exception rather than the rule. Very much so.
So I have a question just to kind of go back. Obviously, we're not afraid of dealing with controversial topics, and you did bring up the whole Trump situation, right? So
I didn't mention him by name, by the way.
Right, I did that. I would throw it in there. But the former president,
yes.
And not obviously asking you to take sides, but I think that we know that we have some guys who are on one side crying, and other guys who are like, hey, we want to see justice and all that. But just purely from a legal standpoint, what you're looking at, what do you see in that?
Well, let me just say that all of the charges that have been brought against the former president, to my knowledge, are criminal. And so, to begin with, that's outside of the area of my experience and expertise. Having said that, we know that one of the charges that's been brought against him involves classified documents. And we also know that President Biden had classified documents at various sources in his home and in his office and things such as that. And he had them there for years, decades. And so people are wondering, how is it that President Trump would be charged in warp speed time for a document matter where President Biden has not been charged at all.
Yeah.
And we don't know anything about the documents that President Biden had, and yet we know that they went through Melania's underwear drawer searching for classified documents when they raided his home in West Palm Beach. So that's the reason why I think there's people that think there's a two-tiered system of justice, because you have two people that essentially, at least from 30,000 feet, look like they've done almost the same thing. And one of them has been charged at warp speed and the other one hasn't been charged at all, and you hear nothing about any of the documents that he had. So I think it's troubling, but I don't know that there's a miscarriage of justice going on here, because I don't know what the documents he had were. That's President Trump, and I don't know what President Biden had in his garage next to his Corvette.
It is. It's confusing to us, and it does seem political at that level. What comes up to my mind is that we need Christian lawyers, and we need Christian lawyers in different kinds of law to bring biblical values, at least to argue for biblical values.
Well, and argue for what is what we might an antiquated notion that there really is some level of truth.
Yeah,
It's not your truth or my truth. We live in a society where everybody gets to say their own truth. Mm-hmm. I remember listening to the confirmation hearing in the Brett Kavanaugh matter, where he was being considered for Supreme Court, and they found someone that allegedly would say that he was engaged in inappropriate sexual activity decades before. And when she got off the witness stand, one of the senators said, "Well, we've heard her truth." And I sat there and I thought, well, yeah, we did hear her truth, but the question is, did we hear the truth?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of other people wondered the same thing, since there was no one to corroborate anything she had to say.
That's right.
But I think that's where we are as a culture, and that has nothing to do with law. That has to do with religion.
Mm-hmm. Really does. I was talking to a young man right after Forge today who was taking a philosophy class, and he was talking about how his prof was talking about, again, that very same thing, that no one can ultimately know. And of course, we do take steps of faith. Those who are atheist or agnostic take a step of faith that there is no God.
Amen.
And we take a
We
step
call
of
it a leap of faith where I come from.
Yeah. Right. A huge. And we Christians admit that we trust in Jesus Christ and in the Bible, but for good reason. But we trust that moral system.
Yes.
And the law in America was originally founded on the Judeo-Christian ethic. Is that correct, or is that?
Yeah. Well, I taught a law school course at Berry Law on foundations of law.
Okay.
And the bedrock of my class was the Declaration of Independence. And most people are not familiar with the Declaration of Independence, but they are familiar with the statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What most people don't know is that in the Declaration, there's reference to the laws of nature, and nature's God. The Creator is described as the supreme judge of the world, and the founders say they rely on divine providence for the success of the endeavor that they were proceeding into. And so it's a theological document, and it's been incorporated into the Constitution by reference. And it's very critical at this stage that we remind ourselves that our Constitution was never intended to be interpreted in a vacuum. It was always intended to be interpreted in the context of the Declaration, which is the foundation, the spirit of which the Constitution was ultimately laid.
Wow.
Yeah, I was listening to the new Speaker of the House when he was giving his speech, his acceptance speech, and he mentioned the Declaration of Independence, if I'm not mistaken, and I think he pointed to that phrase, these rights that we have been given by our Creator.
Right.
And those words specifically being against the humanistic, atheistic ideas of the time, where we were being clear that, hey, we don't have these rights because government has given this to us.
Right.
We have these rights because of a Creator,
right,
who we're going to give an account to.
Exactly. And let's just remember that when we jettison the Creator from our founding documents, which is, I think, what's the attempt to do that is in the process of taking place before our very eyes. What are we left with? We're not left with all men are created equal. We are left with all men are equal, but some are more equal than others.
That's right.
And that was the message of Orwell in Animal House.
Animal Farm?
Animal House, my favorite movie.
Back to those college days.
Yeah. Toga, toga. So anyway, Animal Farm, where it was an analogy, an allegory of what would happen to us as a people when we abandon the principle that all men are created equal, and we go instead to all men are equal, which eventually evolves into some are more equal than others.
And really Christians ought to go back, read the Constitution, read Animal Farm, read Aldous Huxley. And what was his book again?
Brave New World?
Brave New World. And, there's an interesting interplay between those two books, Brave New World and Animal Farm, Orwell and Huxley. And, Big Brother, the whole idea of Big Brother.
Yeah. Do you want to hear something unique and interesting in my mind?
Yeah.
So 1984 was a sort of a dystopian novel about what would happen in the future, and it was set in London, right?
Yep.
It was set in London. So at the end of the book, I thought it was particularly strange that Orwell goes from the setting of the London novel and starts talking about the Declaration of Independence.
Huh.
And he says that we will know, in a sense, that the secular revolution has succeeded when the principles contained in the Declaration of Independence are considered crime think.
Mm-hmm.
When it's a thought crime to hold to the principles contained in the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
And many people are not aware that harmful language alerts have been placed on the Declaration of Independence. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, because they're concerned that they might emotionally trigger people who are sensitive because of their diverse views on religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, who would be opposed to a document that says all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with rights, except someone that doesn't believe in a creator?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And really, the urges that Orwell and Huxley were looking ahead to they're inculcated in Marxist theology and Marxist ideology.
Yeah.
And it's critical race theory. It's all that. It's infiltrated American educational system, and it's infiltrating our jurisprudence as well.
Well, if you read the Second Humanist Manifesto, it says the true revolution is occurring, and the 21st century can and should be a secular century.
Yeah.
And we are now in in a secular century.
No doubt.
And the war that is going on is not a political or a cultural war. It's a spiritual battle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a deeply, deeply spiritual battle.
Absolutely, it is. And we need to see that as Christians, for sure. Wow.
Yeah, and in your profession, I know ethics and doing the right thing are very important.
But what is the right thing?
That exactly, and how do we find that, right?
Yeah.
So what advice, to kind of wrap this up, what advice would you have for someone who, in whatever profession they have, how to figure out how to work and lead their life ethically and according to the right thing? How would you advise them?
Well, you first have to decide who's going to decide what's right and wrong. And there's a tremendous essay by Arthur Leff who said either God exists or he does not, but if he does not, no one can take his place. So if we want to understand what's right and wrong, and as you said today, Pete, character is how you live your life. We have to decide what are some non-negotiable moral principles that will determine whether I'm living my life. King said, will we be judged by the color of our skin or the content of our character? Mm-hmm. And how we live our life is the content of our character. Mm-hmm. And I think King at least advocated for a biblical worldview in terms of determining whether or not we were living rightly before God. A just law, said King, is the law that complies and comports with the moral law of God. An unjust law is a law that's out of harmony with the moral law of God.
Totally.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining us. I think that was really great, really good discussion. And I want to thank everyone at home for listening to this episode of the Forge Truth Podcast. If you have any questions or comments on what we've talked about today, you can email the show at forge@forgetruth.com. If you're interested in learning more about the Forge movement, you can check out our website at forgetruth.com. And if you're listening to this and instead you want to see what we look like, we have a video version of this podcast that you can find, and there's a link in the podcast description. Thank you again, Jim, for coming. And Jason, why don't you leave a challenge for our men today?
Yeah, Jim, we appreciate you. And thank you for your testimony and even doing what I think the scriptures say. The scriptures tell us in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 and 16, the Apostle Paul writes to the church of Ephesus, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil." And guys, we are living in evil days, and we have been redeemed in order to redeem. So while the backdrop may look bleak and it may seem like it's getting darker, just remember that the gospel shines brightest in the midst of darkness. So be a man who's redeeming the time that we live in.